Westeros and Essos have some bizarre places that characters can visit, but none of them are quite as bizarre as the island of Ib in the north of the Shivering Sea, where you can find cavemen, children of the forest, and hot Velaryons. Now, when I say cavemen, I mean like kinda cavemen, because there are like non-humans, humanoid types in Essos and Westeros, if you know where to look for them. Now, there's the obvious ones in, like the children of the forest. There are also giants that you see in the main series, but then, as I mentioned before, in Sithorios, you have a group called the Brindled Men, who are like kinda human, but not really human, because like they look a little more like, I don't, like Neanderthals. They look like cavemen, kind of. And I know Neanderthals aren't cavemen, but I'm just using the colloquial, whatever. But we know that they're not human because they can't, procreate successfully with other humans because they're like something else. And another good example of that is Ib. This island right here in the north of Essos in the Shivering Sea has a group of humans called the Ibbenese, except they're not like really human, they're like human-like. There aren't any really good illustrations of them that I can find, but the way that the books describe them is they're all like very short. They're no more than like 5.5 feet tall. Like that's the tallest one. So the shorter ones are like probably closer to like 5 feet or so. They have very, very short legs, but bizarrely long arms. They're very pale, so pale that you can see like the veins underneath them. And then their bodies are covered in like very like coarse, wiry black hair, which just like, picture that in your mind. Like, it's human, but it's not human, you know what I mean? And if you'll allow me to go on a tangent for a second, I do think that that's a very interesting choice to include in a fantasy series, because that's very, like, real world, Humans are Homo sapiens. We're just one of the many, like, humanoid species that existed. We're just the ones that lived. And so in Westeros and Essos, you have, like, obviously Homo sapiens being, like, the predominant group, but it's cool to think that, like, oh, some of these other, like, examples of speciation have survived into the modern day of, Westeros and Essos. But what we know about the Ibbenese is, kind of what they allow you to know. So the biggest city on Ib is the port of Ibben, as you can see in this illustration right here. And it is, it's a city. It's a city. So, like, obviously, these people are intelligent, even if they're culturally and, species-wise different than us. The Port of Ibben is the most successful and largest of the port cities on the Shivering Sea. Remember, the Shivering Sea is like the northernmost sea that goes like along the north of Essos and touches kind of like the edge of eastern Westeros. Directions, they're fun. But from what we know about the Ibbenese, they're very good craftsmen. They're also like a good like seafaring folk. These are the people who are basically like the whalers of Essos, which isn't a fun subject obviously to talk about, but it's one of the reasons that the port of Ibben is apparently very wealthy, because the products that require that are all produced here and sold here. So a lot of, ships from all over the world make their way to the port of Ibben. But even though, there's obviously a lot of traffic here, going inland isn't really a thing. It's a big, like, mountainous region with lots of, like, very old forests where seemingly most of the Ibbenese live, but the more inland Ibbenese are a little shyer than the seafaring folk bunch. They like to kind of keep to themselves, and even just, like, in general, like, from each other. According to the books, they all live, like, pretty, like, solitary lives, and they only really get together for things like weddings, funerals, etc. So very few people actually get to visit, and by people I mean like Westerosi, SOC, Homo sapiens get to visit because you have to be invited, and that happens very rarely. And I mean visit like inland. The port people, anyone can go there as long as you got the money for it, so that's different. Now, while the Ibbenese are now mostly just like traders, they did used to be kind of conqueror colonizers. You can see in the ruins here, this is the ruins of basically the castle of who used to be called the God King. The God King would rule Ib, was an Ibbenese, person, and they conquered a lot of like the north of Essos. And it wasn't until the Century of Blood, which was like the 100 years after the Doom of Valyria, where all of Essos basically exploded because of the power vacuum and everyone was fighting each other, that in that mess with all the chaos, that the God Kings were like finally like kind of defeated, and Ibben became kind of a smaller power. So now they are ruled by a shadow council. That's what they're called. They're called the Shadow Council. And it's basically just a group of like all the rich folk, the noblemen, the merchants, etc. And they basically just, make all the decisions and rule, which, I mean, I guess it's better than a king, but, oligarchy ain't all it's cracked out to be, I suppose. Also, last note before I move on to, Children of the Forest and Dragon Bones, which apparently might have existed here, I would like to also clarify that another reason that I think it's very clear that this is speciation, the Ibbenese are not really Homo sapiens, is the whole, procreating thing. Kind of like the Brindlemen and Sithorios, when Homo sapiens, Westeros Essos have tried to procreate with the Ibbenese, it never works out. Either, the baby doesn't baby, it's, born without, yeah. Or, there is a child born, but they are sterile. They aren't able to have their own children. So, best case scenario, you produce a sterile child. Worst case scenario, you get, I don't, they said deformed. I don't know. But something interesting to note, like I mentioned, Ib had colonized, a lot of this area up here in northern Essos, and possibly drove another humanoid group to extinction, a gentle forest-dwelling folk that were known for their small stature. Hey, Children of the Forest. So it seems like while we know that Children of the Forest were mainly in Westeros, they might have actually, been in Essos a bit as well, because I believe it's the forests in the northern part of Essos here where some of the remains were found, or was it remains? Actually, wait, hold on a minute. Okay, not remains. Basically, they aren't quite sure what exactly happened to the gentle forest-dwelling folk. Some people think that the Ibbenese extinguished them. Some people think that they went into hiding. Others assume that they, maybe they migrated because, they appear somewhere else. When Corlys Velaryon did his 9 voyages around the world, one of the voyages he did was to this area. He went to Ib, of course, to the port of Ib. He went and explored some of these forests here, and it was in there that they found some, interesting things, including trees with lots of carvings into them. Again, who does that sound like? But Corlys is interestingly one of the people who gives us the most insight we have into this other group of forest-dwelling people that lived in the area, because he brought back the word that they were called, which according to the Dothraki name means those who walk in the woods, because the Dothraki knew of them but apparently didn't want to fuck with them. According to the lore, this might have been because they just respected them too much, or possibly because they were scared of them. And since this very much sounds like Children of the Forest, and we know Children of the Forest have lots of magical abilities, that would make sense. If I was a Dothraki, I would probably be weary of these people who can, cause giant floods. But interestingly, the destruction of, the Children of the Forest in Essos by the Ibbenese kind of became their own undoing, because the Ibbenese lost their, foothold over the north of Essos because of the Dothraki. After the, Century of Blood, the Dothraki finally started venturing north, possibly because the children that might have existed there no longer did, and so there was nothing preventing them, and they weren't scared of the Ibbenese. So the Ibbenese lost all of their land with the exception of Ib itself, and then there's Far Ib over here. Now remember, if there's anything else you want me to make a video on, especially if it's related to location-based lore, drop it in the comments. I'm going to be simultaneously posting this video here as well as in the other place. So yeah, please make sure that you're following and liking and sharing and blah, 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 all that fun stuff. Okay, bye y'all!